here.
We'll be the administrator's corner.
Yeah, okay.
Administrator's corner first. Fred B., do you have any? Do you want us in any specific order?
You can sit wherever you want. Just take your 10 card with you.
Yeah, it looks like I'm
I'm
in
so
the front
sorry
row.
that you were that sick. I always hope that I can't get a flu shot, so.
So good afternoon, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. And welcome to our panel on opportunities and challenges of interdisciplinary research, sponsored by the North Carolina State Research Leadership Academy. Before we get started, I just wanted to point up at the screen. If this event is something that's of interest to you, we would also encourage you to take a look at the 2019 University Research Symposium, which will be another opportunity to make some connections and continue to explore intellectual challenges in cross and multidisciplinary research here at NC State. That event will be on March 21st, and there are also some handouts on your tables if you would like to take the link and get signed up. And so with that, I'm going to turn the panel over now to Fred Wright, who's going to be moderating.
Hello, everyone. So I'm your MC for the day. One of the things we want to do is first start off by introducing our panel with an extended set of self-introductions, just to give a little bit of sense of our background and what we're thinking about interdisciplinary research when that often interpreted phrase is used. And then we'll kick off the panel discussion proper. And my name is Fred Wright. I'm the director of the Bioinformatics Research Center here at NC State. I'm a professor of statistics and of biological sciences here, and I've been doing interdisciplinary research my entire career, back when it wasn't sexy. My training is in statistics, and pure statistics actually, and I picked up biological knowledge such as I have it along the way. I'm self-taught that way, which means that I often say things that are wrong, and students correct me, but that's okay because I have a discipline that I go back to. But increasingly, people are truly trained in cross-disciplinary ways that are very impressive nowadays, and really gives us a sense for what the researchers 20 years from now will be like. And in biological data science, as we call it now, this idea of interdisciplinarity is key to the discipline, because no one person can understand everything about the technologies that are bringing the data to us. Statisticians and computer scientists have to work with the data, and each person has to play a role. Many people are cross-trained, but no one person knows everything. And that's something that I didn't really understand as a graduate student. I just knew I had to do this project, and other people were providing data, but I was already embedded within interdisciplinary work, even though I really wasn't aware of it at the time. And then as I became a faculty member, I had to be more cognizant of this. And in my field of statistical genetics and bioinformatics about 20 years ago, it became very apparent that people had to work together in order to accomplish things in team science. And team science is something I want to get to as a topic a little bit later. And then as I started to mentor students, I had to consider, what kind of advice would I give them going forward? Some of them trained in biostatistics were aiming for academic appointments. And there's a constant tension that I think will probably come up later in some of the panel discussion between being perceived as disciplinary and interdisciplinary. Even an inherently interdisciplinary disciplines such as biostatistics has specific journals which are highly ranked and are sought after for publication. And there are people who work in genetics and combining that with statistics who have to make some choices and compromises sometimes about the audience, the best audience for their work, as opposed to, the audience might be the department chair in their department for some of their work. So these are the kind of things that we're going to be discussing today. I've been privileged here to work closely with the Provost's office as part of the Chancellor's Faculty Excellence Program. I was a hire in the CFEP, and I've also been leading one of the new connective clusters, which we call HIBs, that is designed to connect other clusters together. So I think about these issues a lot, but I'm here to learn as well as to pontificate. So with no further ado.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was going to start out by just describing myself as who I am, and I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a scientist, I'm a hunger fighter, and I'm a human rights fighter. And those terms describe me pretty well. My research program focuses on understanding the epidemiology and population biology of a plant pathogen that caused the largest migration of humans in recent history. I work on the pathogen that caused the Irish potato famine. In 1845, this pathogen killed 1 million people, and another 1 million immigrated to the U.S., and about 40 million Americans can claim ancestry due to the famine. So when I think about the pathosystem I work on, it's interdisciplinary in nature just by way of the subject I work on. There was famine, there was hunger, there was human disease, typhoid, cholera, as people migrated in coffin ships across the Atlantic, and then there was the plant disease that started it all. So that's the area of research that I work in. We study the population genetics of Phytophthora, we study its migration, and about 20 years ago I started doing ancient DNA work using historic herbarium samples. And at the time there weren't many people extracting DNA from herbarium samples. So just the nature of the questions I addressed and the collaborators I had to choose to do this science was interdisciplinary as well. And to this day, I still work with many people outside of my discipline rather than, and I do work with people inside my discipline as well, but the collaborators outside my discipline have really fostered creative thought in what I do as a scientist. Our lab was part of a multi-investigator team that sequenced one of the first plant oomycete genomes at the Broad Institute in 2009, and that genome sequencing project, $2 million genome sequencing project at the time, the Broad Institute had these beautiful sequencing machines, so we were actually testing technology in new sequencing areas, but we were also trying to communicate the science that we did to the public. And my role in that project was to run workshops at the Boston Museum of Science for teachers, to communicate the science to the public, to set up a museum exhibit. Then I was also actually part of the scientist team that sequenced the genome and participated in that as well. We still use that genome sequence 10 years later. We've sequenced 70 genomes from this pathogen across the globe. And that's kind of led me into my international interdisciplinary research. I spent a year at USAID as a Jefferson Science Fellow doing policy work. So that took me out of science altogether, and the research organization of AID with their $120 million research budget funding food security grants that were going to Africa or to the U.S. land-grant institutions. So once again, outside of plant pathology, but using my science expertise. In fact, I recall a meeting at the State Department when a coffee rust outbreak occurred where they said, "Is there a plant pathologist in the room?" And I raised my hand. I was the only one, and they were trying to decide where they were going to put $15 million worth of funding to control this outbreak that was killing coffee plants in Central America. So being in the right place at the right time with your interdisciplinary science and policy work is very important. Our team runs a geospatial analytics kind of disease surveillance system now called USA Blight, and that brought me into collaborations with the CNR and the Geospatial Analytics Group and the State Climate Office to develop the technologies we needed to monitor emerging pests and pathogens using real-time tracking systems. And then my international work continues to bring me to many places on the globe doing disease diagnostics and then just policy advising with the Gates Foundation or USAID on plant pathogens that are emerging. And over time, that's led to the development of the cluster that I now lead at NC State, the Emerging Disease and Global Food Security Cluster. In the last 3 years, we hired an engineer from the College of Engineering. We hired a geospatial geographer who's in CNR. We hired a bioinformatician who Fred was involved with hiring, and he's housed in our department and the Bioinformatics Research Center. And then pathologists, 2 virologists. So that team is interdisciplinary by nature, and it's a very creative group. I'm very excited to be leading them. When we cross when we cross boundaries and get out of the silos of our own work, our science is better, our publications have higher impact, and so I'll just end with that.
Hi, that's hard to follow. My name is Maria Mayorga. I'm a professor in industrial and systems engineering, and I'm part of the precision medicine cluster. So usually when I tell people that I'm in industrial and systems engineering and I do precision medicine, they give me a blank stare because well, how do those two things fit together? So I'll tell you, I haven't actually been doing this since graduate school. Actually, in graduate school, doing operations research, I was focused on very traditional supply chain problems. I was focused on assortment planning. How should a retailer decide what jeans are being offered so as to maximize profit? But what was in there was, my focus was on how do I include consumer choice in that? So how does the retailer react when they see what the consumer might think? And it didn't seem to me that impactful. Okay, they can earn, they can get more money, but it didn't, it wasn't that fulfilling. So as soon as I finished my PhD and started my faculty job, I thought about, well, what are problems where you have a consumer that can impact the choice that the person who is making the decision should be making? And I thought of healthcare, and healthcare or health systems engineering was a relatively new area in operations research at the time. And so I started thinking about incorporating patient choice models into models for allocating resources or healthcare resources. And so that's how I got started. NC State wasn't my first academic home, and at the place I was, I really enjoyed working on that, and I was able to build a strong research profile, kind of going outside and doing a lot of knocking on doors and meeting with people in different universities, different departments. But I felt kind of isolated. I was one of the few people doing that research, and there was also no medical school at the institution or close by. So I was recruited to come to NC State as part of the Chancellor Faculty Excellence Program, or the cluster hires in precision medicine. And so at NC State, precision medicine involves statistics, mathematics, and industrial and systems engineering. And what we try to do is try to answer some of the medical questions in a quantitative way using mathematical modeling. For example, to try to figure out, I think our little motto is the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. And of course, we can't do that by ourselves, because even though we can provide the quantitative models, the right questions to ask, and the data, and the policy implications, all of those things, we have to work with people in medicine and health policy and epidemiology and other disciplines like that. So we're very fortunate here in the Triangle to be right next to Duke and UNC, and to have strong partnerships with them along with other institutions. So now in my work, there's several faculty that do health systems engineering that are also part of the cluster in our department. And for example, we answer questions like, how can we use electronic health records to in real time try to predict the onset of a disease that might be really difficult to predict the onset of, like a sepsis, for example, which is a systemic infection of the blood. And then if we can predict that disease, then how do we communicate that information in a way that is not going to overload the providers? Because if you set off alarms all the time, then people are not going to believe the alarm. So how do you actually integrate those recommendations into the existing system? So that's where the systems engineering point of view comes in. So I really enjoy my research in health and humanitarian systems. I think it allows me to have fun questions and hard questions to answer that are going to have impact. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so I'm up next, and I'm going to be coming from a more administrative perspective. So my name is Chris McGann, and I'm Dean of the College of Sciences. And I've been at this university since 1982. And I was a department head from 2004 to 2007 before I became, and that was at the CVM, before I became dean at the College of Sciences. So from my perspective, When the Chancellor's Faculty Excellence Program, the cluster hiring program started, I was very excited. I thought that this was such a really brilliant idea to bring us together. I have a friend that actually was provost at another university, and they just destroyed all the departments and made institutes. So, there are different ways of trying to knock down those silos and create this interdisciplinarity. And I think this was a better way of doing it than doing this huge destruction and then reconstruction. So I was part of a lot of clusters as signing off as a department head that is really interested in supporting it. And in the end, I did hire from 6 separate clusters, 1 faculty member. So I had 6 cluster hires during that time. I think that it hasn't obviously worked 100% well, but it's worked very well. And the hires that we got from that program have been uniformly excellent. So that was an exciting thing for me. And just personally, I've worked on programs like creating our neuroscience PhD program. I worked with a number of people in order to do that, and that was 44 faculty across 5 colleges and over 10 departments. And so that PhD program started in comparative biomedical sciences, which is a cross-university graduate program. And so now we're in the 2nd year of that PhD program. And more recently, with an excellent team headed by Fred Gould, we've been working on, and Jeff Yoder is on that team also. We've embarked on a genetics and genomics initiative. The provost has given us $1 million a year to work on this, to get this program established, and have 15 new graduate students per year for 3 years. And we're on our way. We have a bit of a ways to go to get this launched, but I'm hoping that by the next fiscal year, next academic year, we'll be able to do that. 144 faculty are involved in this initiative across 6 colleges, and I don't know how many departments. Do you know, like 12 or at least a dozen? So that is also another way of breaking down barriers. And recently, the Plant Science Initiative, there are people here involved in that, has reached out across colleges to develop this program, and we've contributed, our college has contributed to the piggy bank that's getting set up for a grant writing program, a GRIP, that's aimed at plant sciences. So there have been a number of things that I've been involved in as an administrator in trying to get funds and bring people together. And I'm really excited to be here today to answer questions and to get ideas from all of you for our moving forward. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Catherine Stewart. I'm here in my role as Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs. Just to give you a sense of my approach and my thinking about interdisciplinarity, I'll tell you about what I think of as the 2 halves of my career, although if I have 2 halves, I'm now thinking that perhaps I will have to have a 3rd half at some point. But for now, let's talk about the 2. The first half of my career as a faculty member was as a psychologist. I'm trained as a psychologist, but all of my career has been in academic health centers and working at the intersection of psychology and infectious disease. During my time as a faculty member, I was primarily funded by NIH. I was PI or co-PI of 3 different R01s, all of which were interdisciplinary in nature and focused on HIV disease. I did a lot of mentoring in cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary graduate programs. And as I moved into administration, which I think of as the second half of my career, that was really what I got excited about, was thinking about how to facilitate faculty and student success, particularly in these kind of interdisciplinary places. I certainly saw, as someone who was funded by NIH, that NIH was very, very interested in students, trainees, and faculty who could solve big problems, address big questions, and you just can't do that without a strong interdisciplinary team. So I was very involved as an administrator in helping faculty in my college develop several different centers, a Center for Minority Health Disparities, a Center for Prevention Research, and ultimately very involved in my university's successful bid for a Center for Translational Science through NIH. Here at NC State, where I have continued my administrative career, my role as Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs is really, what I say to people is that my job is to promote and support faculty success in all realms of responsibility at all stages of faculty careers. Where this plays out, I think, in the area of interdisciplinary research is thinking about how the policies, regulations, and processes of the university do and don't support interdisciplinarity. So whether we're talking about decisions about appointments in certain colleges and how we're going to facilitate faculty who may be very interdisciplinary in their work, whether or not they are affiliated with a cluster, how we're going to support them in that work as they are associated with a department, whether we're talking about promotion standards within departments, or whether we're talking about the post-tenure review process as faculty may move into more engaged research or more applied research. Those are all the kinds of things that I'm thinking about in my role here at NC State, and trying to think about how to facilitate faculty success on these big challenges, on these big questions, which is really, I think, what gets most of us excited. I think the question that Maria was saying, well, these questions are fun, these questions are hard. My thing is, it's kind of cheesy, but it's a quote from a now very old movie called A League of Their Own, in which Tom Hanks is yelling at Gina Davis and says, well, of course it's hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard is what makes it great. Right? And this really is the way I think about the challenges that I've tried to think about as a faculty member, trying to think about HIV disease. And it's what I think many of us as faculty get passionate about, is really hitting hard questions head on. And so thinking about how I can help faculty at NC State do that is what lights me up every day. So.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Nora Hahn, and I think I'm on this panel because I'm a cultural anthropologist who sits in a joint department of sociology and anthropology, where half my teaching is to the undergraduate interdisciplinary program in international studies. And I'm also affiliated faculty with the Genetic Engineering and Society group and the Global WASH group. And so you might be surprised to hear that I don't actually think of myself as interdisciplinary. But as my career has gone along, other people think I'm interdisciplinary, and I keep thinking, why do they think this? I'm actually a horrible anthropological snob. I have to tell you all that anthropology is the best social science, let's just put it out there. But over time, what I realized is that I was trained in a department where it was, so I'm a cultural anthropologist. I do qualitative interviewing with smallholding farmers in southern Mexico. And I was trained in a department that had a freezer in the basement where zoos would send dead animals so that the physical anthropologists could do their work. And I'm hanging out with archaeologists who can talk about soil structure. And we didn't have any Mexicanists in my department, so they sent me over to the history department to learn about Mexico. And so I had this kind of intellectual ecumenical approach kind of baked into my graduate work. And ever since then, I'm always looking for that kind of community. And we can talk about how to get started on interdisciplinary work, because some of Mary Wire in psychology, her very interesting work, says it actually doesn't have anything to do with the research question. A lot of it has to do with liking the people you hang out with. So for example, I hang out with Fred Gould because I was brand new to NC State. He knocked on my door and he said, I'm worried about dengue. I had just moved to North Carolina, and I said, you know dengue? Oh my gosh, you're the first person in North Carolina I've met who knows that there's something called dengue, because in southern Mexico it's a really big problem. The other day we were at the Plant Science Initiatives event, and I met John Klassen, and I think John Klassen and I are going to get along great, because guess what? I really care about migrant farm workers, and John Klassen, who thinks about pig poop, 15, 20 years ago, he and his wife were active in their church initiative on migrant workers. So a lot of this is, for me, about finding intellectual community more than anything else. And I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great. So following the League of Their Own analogy, we'll kick it off with a hardball question. Something we were discussing earlier and came up again and again in the user or the registrant submitted questions is something along the line of how do we maintain policies and such that faculty, especially junior faculty, get quote-unquote credit for interdisciplinary work in their promotion and advancement. Any thoughts?
Well, I would actually say as a former junior faculty member, I would like to see the PIs on this take the lead. And so working with Fred Gould has always been fabulous in that way because Fred almost never stands up without thanking other people and pointing out people in the crowd who are in his group. And that is key for junior faculty. Or if I speak up in a meeting and the women in the room will know what happens, when you say something and then the conversation moves on and your idea gets either forgotten or picked up by somebody else and you're not acknowledged, Fred always acknowledges you. Fred says, yeah, but what about Nora said? And so I really think that the lead PIs on this can go a long way to supporting those junior faculty.
I think as a department head, I'm sorry. As a department head, this was always a big question. At one point, we were encouraged to, we were on an educational bent and hiring people to do assessment and such at the vet school. And I was asked to take a faculty member who is an educationalist. And one of the questions they had for me was, okay, what's going to happen when this person comes up for tenure in a clinical and basic science department? And so what we did was when we were voting on whether to take this person into a tenure track position, we made sure that we discussed how this would work for that person in our department. And because it would be difficult for us to judge her contributions because it was really outside of our area. And that really, is true for all kinds of interdisciplinary programs. But I think it really starts at the department level. And in this particular case, this person did an extraordinary job, had over 40 publications when she came up for tenure, and was helping a lot of people with their curriculum, with their syllabus, with their teaching, everything, and really became part of the department. And it was just a no-brainer that she got tenured. But that had to start with, like an acceptance of the faculty and an understanding that this was going to be a different person than we were used to. So I think it really starts at the department level. And then, by the time it gets to the dean decision, most of the stuff is done already. If it's done right in the department, it's not a problem. I haven't had a problem. I've just been through 2 cycles now as dean. I've not had a problem in that regard to date. I hope that we don't have that problem, and I hope that the departments are being schooled in how to judge these interdisciplinary faculty.
I wanted to follow up on a couple of different points that you made, Nora, about the working in a group of interdisciplinary scholars that you enjoy working with, and that being in that comfort zone with people you work with. And I think over my career, I've tried to seek out groups where my work is acknowledged, where they understand what I'm doing in science, and where I understand what they're doing. So finding kind of nurturing, kind of supportive and comfortable interdisciplinary groups where your views and values can be heard and appreciated. And then when you're leading an interdisciplinary group or a part of a big team. I was a part of a 25 co-PI group that was funded through USDA, a $9 million CAP grant. And at the outset, we had pretty clear ideas about who was working on what portions of the project. So having very organized interdisciplinary projects, who would do what parts of the science. And then even when the papers came out, if there were many of us that contributed even collections or samples, we were all co-PIs on the paper, but the people who wanted to be senior author or who felt they needed to be in that senior position, they were acknowledged, and there could be multiple senior authors. Now a lot of the journals allow you to say this person wrote, this person contributed intellectual thought. These 3 are senior PIs, you know, so you can be really explicit about saying what your credit is and contribution, and claim the credit. Sometimes younger faculty tend not to, they want to, they listen to the senior faculty sometimes and will take the subordinate position, when that probably is not the best thing to do for their careers. You know, claiming their credit and at the outset of projects, understanding whose role is whose, and then having shared authorship, but also having plenty of strong papers in your own discipline. I'm a plant pathologist. We've got a cultural anthropologist here, an industrial engineer. Plenty of those sole single author papers or papers where you lead. Those are important too to have on your record when you're going up for tenure. So I think having that balance is really important.
I think I would just add to the, I think, very wise comments that have already been made, that there are a few things that you can do as a faculty member that are really important. And some of those, I think, come from my perspective now. In the role that I'm in, I read all of the promotion and tenure dossiers that come up through the university. So that's, this year it was 196. I've seen a lot of different ways this can go. And what I will say, as somebody who's thought about it that way, and also somebody who, it doesn't feel like that many years ago, was writing her own promotion dossier to get promoted to full professor. It doesn't feel like long ago at all. You really do, as a faculty member, need to take control of your story. You know, I published as much in HIV journals as behavioral science journals. And my behavioral science colleagues didn't know the HIV journals, and my infectious disease colleagues didn't know the psychology journals. And so it was my job in the introductory statement of my promotion dossier, and here at NC State we have a 2-page candidate statement that you're allowed to use as your introductory statement, to explain why I was publishing certain things in HIV journals and why I was publishing certain things in psychology journals, explaining how those things were taken up either by my discipline, by behavioral scientists, or in HIV practice, and showing evidence for that, citing impact factors all over the place, listing the numbers of citations of my work. I didn't let the equivalent of the DVF that was considering my promotion to full go find that out. I told them what it was. And I think you do, when you are working in an area where you know that the people who are going to be voting on your package may not fully understand the whole story, not because they don't care about it or because they have a problem with it, but just because it's not typical of what they tend to see. You know, it's not personal, it's just not typical of what they tend to see. You do need to take control of that story. And I think it is important to do that. I will say something that I almost stood up and applauded, Chris, when you said what you did about hiring an educationalist into your department. I do think that it's very, very important that senior faculty, including department heads, when they hire someone into their department who is highly interdisciplinary, that they have the conversation then about what success will look like for that individual and how they are going to foster that success. That faculty member's success will be part of the reputation of that department. So the question of how will we be valuing the work that this person does, even if it looks kind of different from some of the things that those of us who are more rooted in the discipline do, I think is an important conversation to have. It's also an important conversation to have with that junior faculty member about, as Jean was saying, how much of your publication, how much of your work should be clearly rooted in the discipline, and how are you going to show that to your discipline-based colleagues. So I think it's everyone's responsibility, from the faculty member to the senior colleagues to the department head and on, to try to create an environment where this can happen.
If I could add, and for me the most important place for that controlling narrative is the SME SRF. So I was at Arizona State when it became all interdisciplinary all the time, and so I understand why this is a better model. But one of the things that I learned from there that I've really come to appreciate is that they didn't have an SME model before they went interdisciplinary. But basically the assumption was that nobody was going to understand your research. That's what it meant for them going interdisciplinary, and that you were going to have to explain your career trajectory. And you started with the SME, so that when you went up, you said, hey, this is what we agreed on when I came in the door. I have met these standards, therefore there shouldn't be too much argument about my promotion.
Yeah, a couple of those comments really resonated with me in ways that I haven't quite articulated very well in the past. So from time to time, I'm mentoring people and giving them career advice, and many of them are interdisciplinary researchers. And one thing I have found is that if there's a way that their research as a body can be encapsulated or has a theme, then it's a lot easier to sell. And so you can get these apparently paradoxical situations where a junior researcher publishes here and there, and they look like disparate things until you get to some point where there's a critical mass, and then she or he can sell himself or herself as an integrative omics expert or something like that. And then the threads that previously had seemed like a scattered or nebulous CV suddenly become of a piece. And it takes a little while for that to mature to get to that point. And I'm not sure that that's very actionable beyond just publishing a lot and being able to do this, but it's maybe words of encouragement to those of you in the audience who are kind of working that way. But there has to be a lot of mentorship along the way. A few other things that came to my mind during the discussion was an observation that I think it's an unfortunate reality still that the interdisciplinary hires and the ones we've seen through the cluster system, they're often, I think, a bit better than the median and maybe have to be in order to satisfy enough of their voting constituency in their department. And there's a certain credibility that goes along with publishing in certain journals, and many of them do somewhat, perhaps not as a high proportion of their profile as do the more disciplinary scientists. But if a single publication here or there in the most recognized journals in their field can go a long way for that interdisciplinary researcher. And I'm saying this with an eye toward all the department chairs who are in the audience. Anyway, any other thoughts on this topic? Yes. Harry.
Henry Schaefer, I guess, biological sciences. I'm really enjoying the panelists, but I would submit that the panelists represent the biased sample of what's going on this campus, because they're all supportive and involved and advocates for interdisciplinary. I had spent some time with a department, not mine, but an unnamed department, that was participating in a cluster hire. And they were participating in a cluster hire, and they were very frank. This was a chance to get someone in a subdiscipline of their department who was going to work in that subdiscipline, in their discipline, in that department, but they would get the cluster hire if they pushed hard enough. And I wonder what happens, or I'm going to put it differently. I wonder to what extent does our university work with the department and the department head to infuse them with this idea that a person, an interdisciplinary, a cluster hire, will actually span disciplines and not just solely work in this department.
So Henry, to restate the question, beyond the carrot of the financial support for the cluster hires, what else is the university doing to support the individual who gets hired?
I'm talking about trying to make sure that the department head feels like our panel.
Any thoughts?
I guess as dean, I could mandate it from our department heads, but I don't think I have to, because I think our department heads all think that way. But I am aware, Henry, that you are right, that some people did use this program to get people in their departments. And that's unfortunate for the people that were hired unless they can break out of that in some way. But I don't know how to make that happen all throughout the university. Maybe Catherine has a better idea.
I did not bring my wand. You know, Henry, I think you raise an important point, and I would not disagree with you that kind of thinking exists on this campus and to the detriment of some of our faculty. You know, I think that departments, we do need to really encourage department heads who are hiring faculty, not just, I want to keep emphasizing this, not just in the cluster program, right? We are hiring faculty who have interdisciplinary interests and a desire to do interdisciplinary scholarship, both in the Chancellor's Faculty Excellence Program and outside of it. But departments that are hiring faculty who are working in these interdisciplinary spaces do need to have the conversation. Department heads by themselves cannot drive a senior faculty's implementation of its promotion standards. The promotion standards that exist on paper in the department's promotion and tenure rule, and the department standards as functionally evident in the behavior of the DVF during the DVF meetings and the DVF votes, are things that are collectively created by the senior faculty. But the department head can facilitate very important conversations about what do we want those standards to look like on paper, and how do we want to make those standards come to life in the room when we're voting on appointments, reappointments, promotion, tenure, and eventually post-tenure review for tenure track faculty. One thing I will say is that there is, I think, a very legitimate and important tension that departmental faculty have to wrangle with, and I saw this a lot in my field. I was associate dean of a college of public health, so we had interdisciplinary faculty all over the place. But many of those folks were epidemiologists, and many of those folks were policy scientists. And the tension in the department was, how strong do you need someone to be in the discipline before they're actually capable of being a good functional partner on an interdisciplinary team, right? Because you can't be a good partner on an interdisciplinary team if you aren't rock solid in your discipline. That's just true, I believe, for at least certainly for me as a psychologist. And so the tension in the room for departments was, how do we see the evidence that this person is rock solid in their discipline, and so solid that they are able to do the work of being in an interdisciplinary team? And what's the evidence for that? Ultimately, I think what we have to do is keep encouraging heads and DVFs to have the conversation about what are we putting in our standards that speak to those issues, and as importantly, how do those standards as printed on the paper play out when we as senior faculty are in the room making decisions about our colleagues' careers?
I want to just, Fred, I don't know if you wanted to
Yeah,
change
go
the
ahead.
question or.
No, were you going to address that one, or
Well, no, well, sort of.
please?
I think a lot of times interdisciplinary scientists think outside of the box, and I just question whether they would read the standards. And it may be a joke, but I mean, it's like, they're rule breakers. I think people who think outside the box tend to do that and don't want to get caught up in the rules, so figure it out as they go. And that's just that's how I regard myself a lot, you know.
Yeah, and I'm not always convinced that these are intellectual problems. You know, I think there's a lot more going on here. And I think one of the reasons why the interdisciplinary folks that Fred mentioned seem to be above the median is the soft skills that it required to have these collegial communities. You have to sit there and say, I don't know. I'm not an expert. You have to have a certain humility when you're working in these interdisciplinary settings in a field where we're kind of trained to build ourselves up and to be the know-it-all. So as far as these department heads, I think we're going to see this coming forward from the emails I get out of the provost's office that you all get. Soft skill training for the department heads, how to have a difficult conversation. how to, hold people's hands after the difficult conversation. There's all kinds of things that could be attended to. Maybe the interdisciplinarity isn't the main point of contention. Maybe there's another contention going on that's getting played out in the name of interdisciplinarity. We're not all psychologists and we're not all moms, but we need these kinds of enormous soft skills in our administrators in order to have a kind of healthier faculty life, I think.
So I had an ancillary thought that sprang into my mind when we talked about the tension here. One small funny paradox I've noticed is that the cluster faculty candidates, many of the best ones, are attracted because of the Chancellor's Faculty Excellence Program, the interdisciplinary spirit that they see when they visit, but also they're attracted to the department rankings of the departments when they come here. So they know all the rankings from U.S. News and World Report, and those are largely based on disciplinary history. And the picture that comes to my mind is that there's some kind of equilibrium of interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary research along with a disciplinary background, and I don't think we've reached quite the equilibrium yet, but I think it's important to emphasize that disciplinary work really is valued and should be. It's just that we're here to promote interdisciplinary research today. Okay. I had another thought that I wanted to throw out to the committee or the panel here, and that's about team science. So a few years ago was quite a bit of attention paid to team science. It has come in various forms, but just a couple years ago with the Large Hadron Collider work and other kinds of collaborations, for example, in astronomy, making a big deal about enormous teams being necessary to achieve certain goals. And some work that some of you may have heard about that found that collaborations are apparently more successful when researchers are close to each other or within one short plane ride away from each other. I don't really know entirely what to make of that research, except that the claim is that being an hour plane ride away is much better than 3 hours away in order to work together. At the same time, work just for a couple weeks ago published in Nature suggested that, quote, large teams develop, small teams disrupt. So that small team research actually historically and repeatedly has been shown to actually produce more consequential breaks in research fields from past work, whereas large teams are necessary to develop and refine research. And so I just wanted to ask the panel what they think about those thoughts.
To the first part about the distance, I think it's more important to know the style in which people work, and some people are really great over Zoom and others not so great. So I think if you know the style of your team, even though I'm working with people at UNC, I don't drive over there every day because then I'd lose 2 hours of my day. So I'm still meeting with them on Zoom, even though they are right there, and I don't necessarily meet with them. But we have very structured meeting times so that we know exactly when we expect to meet. And it's there even if we get to erase it for a week or something like that, then we have the meeting times set up. And that's one thing that we reset every semester because of the teaching schedules that people have. And then when the team starts to get large, what is important is to have these breakout teams to achieve, because if all the time is spent recapping or kind of going over what everybody did, then you actually never get to do any work, and sometimes you need to be able to talk to the people, only one person in the other team or something like that. So we have the larger group meetings and then we have breakout meetings, and I think to me the distance is not that important, except that we do try to at least once a semester take a whole day and just kind of block it off and be able to be in a room together to kind of go over, okay, what are the goals that we have for the semester, or even have a writing day. We've all we've all been working on all these papers, but they are not all finished, so maybe we can have a day where we just come and finish writing together in a huddle or something like that. So I think it's more important about being organized, knowing how to run teams. She was talking to the soft skill. That is something that you learn along the way when you work in teams. Now, that is to say, like, a small distance is not a big, now, I think the time zones can be a huge deal, right? When you're trying to, or if you have 3 time zones. The other day I was the earliest call at 9 a.m. here, and there was somebody in China at 10 p.m. I mean, I felt bad for the person in China talking to me at 10 p.m., but that had to be the time because there was somebody in Europe talking in the evening there. So it just becomes really difficult if you have a large difference in time zones, and you just have to be creative. What we do sometimes is we know a conference that we'll all be going to, and so we'll all make sure that we set extra days to work before, after, or during the conference when we have such things. But yeah.
I think this idea of small teams as being disruptors and large teams, I'm not really sure whether or not that plays out, but I think the distinction they're probably getting at there is flexibility. So I know that when I work on teams, I actually have a lot less flexibility than when, of course, I work alone. And one of the things I love about being trained in anthropology is in cultural anthropology, we are trained to follow the people. So in graduate school, we're actually told, oh, you may have trained to go study environmental management, but if you get there and there's a really pressing issue that everybody cares about, you're allowed to dump that and just follow people where they take you. And so that allows an enormous amount of flexibility that can only be done if I'm working all by myself, right? So I think the small team, large team thing is just a question of how locked in is your research writing time to the larger project and how much flexibility you have.
Maybe the audience has some comments.
Yep.
That was the one that
Yes.
was behaving.
We have a microphone.
It was this one.
Yeah.
New lab that they don't normally have a big amount of members when you start a new laboratory, for example. So, and when you're new, it's even difficult to find collaboration at the beginning. So it takes a while before to reach a, let's say, a good number in size of the team. So how you think you can improve this aspect?
Maria.
Hello? I think they're all off now. That's okay. I can talk loud. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Your question was about how to... Hello? Okay. Your question was about how to ensure that you find the right people so that you can grow your team?
Yeah, in the beginning, when I'm new, for example, a new assistant professor, we are 2 people.
Yeah.
Me and my technician. So when you're new in the as a faculty in a university, even if you don't know anyone, of course you can go to interdisciplinary meeting, you can go to whatever type of event is in the university, but you still need to grow, right?
Yeah.
So the beginning is difficult to have a big team.
Yeah.
And I know about this publication, so in the beginning, being more than 2 is not easy.
Yeah, so what I was going to suggest is to find the person who is a connector, because you don't need to find the whole group. You need to find the integral person that has a team or a group of people that they're well connected to. And then once you attach yourself to that person, then that person can like share their network with you. So it's really about finding those connectors, those people. And then the other thing is you have to find people that have the same hunger as you, that are at the same level as you. So like if you find somebody is a big name in the field, but they're already well established, they're already on like 10 different large teams, they're not going to necessarily have interest or time or curiosity to do what you're interested in. So if you look for someone who is like at the same about the same level, who is really, okay, I really need to publish, I'm really interested in looking for different things, then that person will be more likely to endure the hard part, which is like figuring out what is the question that we're going to go after together. But you really have to get creative and look at titles of events and just kind of at the beginning just start showing up to as many things as you can. One thing I saw at a different institution, that I really liked was called Coffee and Conversation. And what that was is like the new people that came, you say, I'm going to invite so-and-so, and I'm going to have coffee and conversation every semester where, or however, once a month or something, and I'm going to tell you about my research, and here are the questions I have and why I think I need other disciplines to help me, and just kind of facilitate that. So you actually invite people to come and listen to what your needs are. So those are some suggestions.
This gets to the idea of this collision spaces, and that was one of the questions that was submitted by the group ahead of time. And creating your own collision spaces, like coffee and conversation, like my colleagues talking about, or perhaps holding your own, organizing a meeting. I mean, I've done that several times here, especially as we were starting the cluster off, bringing in experts in the field that were doing the best in emerging disease biology and epidemiology and population genetics and geospatial analytics. You bring them here, and we have 3/4 of the meeting is breakout sessions where we're just talking ideas. And that helps foster further collaboration for you in your, whatever your field is, I'm not sure what your field is, but it also just, you have these opportunities to collaborate with a person that you might not have thought about. And that for PSI GRIP did that a while back with the networking, the speed networking, where you kind of have a fast presentation on what your science is about. The climate group here at NC State has done that as well, where they, the climate initiative, where they were doing 5-minute presentations. So you see 50 faculty science in an hour, and then it's like you're aware of who's doing what where. And that doesn't happen often enough here. It's happened, not often enough. And those are the kinds of opportunities that can bring people together to do really innovative science. And, maybe on a regular basis that needs to happen so that new faculty don't come on board and feel like they're the only one working in their group, and who else can I collaborate with. The web portals could be improved here at the university as well, so we know how there are these network maps. Network maps of how many, you might find people that have 5,000 collaborators and they've got all the spikes out of their point, but others that are out here lonely by themselves and really want to work with somebody. That kind of network map could be created for our campus in the 5 colleges, or I don't know how many colleges there are, 6 now, 10, I'm embarrassing myself. But anyway, those sorts of things could really help connect people, because you might find there are some people really connected with others that could help you. We did that at a Gates meeting a while back, and it was interesting. We sorted things out by crop, and we found there was like 50 people working on cassava and 2 working on potatoes, it helps you to realize where the science needs to head on some of these crops we're trying to solve diseases. You could do the same thing with the university. Maybe somebody in the provost's office or at the university level.
I would say, just briefly, that this dovetails, that'll cause feedback. This dovetails with the advice that I give to junior faculty to find a collaborator with expertise that's complementary to yours, and find somebody good. Perhaps, it could be someone who's more senior and can act as a mentor, or someone who's junior, as long as that person is very solid with his or her work, so that you can grow together. And, in my own personal experience, I've had some people approach me years past, and then we end up collaborating, and it becomes a long-standing, mutually beneficial, set of.
I would just like to underscore one small thing about this. Everybody on this panel who's responded to your question has basically said, go talk to people. And I want to just speak up and say that would be my answer too, because all of the great collaborations that happened in my career in the first 6 or 7 years of my career, so like my early career phase, were when I kind of reached out and went and talked to someone. Very often, totally cold calling. Like as a 3rd-year graduate student in a program that had never had a collaboration in the HIV clinic, I made an appointment with the director of the HIV clinic and said, you need psychology in your clinic, right? Which was kind of a gutsy thing to do, right? I am a huge introvert. Like, I'm off the charts introvert. I do things like this and I have to go lie down afterwards. And a lot of faculty are that introverted. A lot of us are really, really shy. And this idea that you're just going to go out and start talking to people and walking up to people at poster sessions and saying, wow, your poster's really interesting. I would love to come up with an idea that we could work on together is not, like, when I go to a professional meeting, I would so much rather be in my room ordering room service and working on a paper than forcing myself to go to the poster session and interacting with people. But that's how I have met all the cool people that I've ended up doing big research projects with. So what I would say to you is, it is so important to do that reaching out, and do, even if that really doesn't come naturally to you, because it is the crux of how you get started. It starts coming to you more than that after you've gotten the momentum going, but you really do have to kind of start that. Excellent.
Okay.
See, so not everybody's like that not everybody's like me that just wants to. Yeah.
All right, we have a question in the back.
Yeah, I just want to point out that the discussion about how do you make connections within the university, the Research Leadership Academy understands that this is a big problem, and that's why we've established that University Research Symposium. The idea of the University Research Symposium is for people that are interested in developing collaborations to come and show the work you're doing, and you're going to be among like-minded people who are also interested in making cross-disciplinary interactions. So there's it's a university-sanctioned event with that idea in mind, that we're going to build a research community across disciplines and people can get to know each other. So, that's on your table here. It's April, I guess it's March 21st.
March 21st.
So if you haven't signed up for that, I encourage you to look into that and participate.
So some of this discussion reminded me of some thoughts that I heard in earlier meetings about maybe actually trying to formally train graduate students in interdisciplinary work and team science. And they don't need to be trained in some things. They're using Slack channels and talking to each other and things that really are beyond my generation. So, but I'm curious about your thoughts about the idea of formal training in team science.
So again, this is maybe going to sound a little bit different. As an anthropologist, it's not like we have a killer job market out there. Historians, political scientists. So in some ways, interdisciplinarity is the toolkit to get a job. And people are getting self-conscious. They're getting trained in this kind of what they call the T-shaped. You all know the T-shaped learner, like really deep in one area and then reaching out to other areas. Often what we say is, so for example, right now there's a cultural anthropologist in our history program because she does public history. And we hired an archaeologist. He can teach ethics courses. We can get anybody into an ethics course. Part of the way of training is to think strategically about what that secondary area could be that might, if you're going an academic track, get you on the radar for more jobs, but also thinking about core stuff that everybody needs across disciplines and becoming the expert in that sense.
Okay, great. Any other questions at the moment? All right. Grants. So we haven't really drilled down into mentorship and suggestions for junior researchers and getting collaborative funding and getting credit for collaborative funding. So I wanted to focus in on that a little bit. Any thoughts?
I had seen that was one of the questions, and specifically, I think it said, like, what are the opportunities at NC State and then beyond? And so at NC State, there are a whole bunch of small seed grants, like the RISIF, and then there's these collaboratives between NC State and UNC for these translational research grants. There's the one that and there's also one for Duke. So those are going to have to be, I guess they don't have to be, but to me, in my mind, those are meant to be interdisciplinary grants, and those are where each institution puts something in. So they come out often. So there's opportunities for small things, maybe something you haven't tested before. And I was thinking about this. I mean, NSF, that is their whole big drive now, right? They talk about convergence. Convergence is not cross-disciplinary, not interdisciplinary. It's beyond that. It's creating something like neuroscience is a result of convergence or convergent research. They're also looking at very large-scale or targeted things like smart cities or smart communities or smart and connected health. These problems are interdisciplinary by nature. So if you look at the calls that are out there, at least from NSF, you're going to have to do interdisciplinary research. And even like NIH has some different ones, like they now have a systems science call in NIH. So there are definitely a lot of funding opportunities out there. How to get the funds, I think it's good to try for small things first and develop it. And also, maybe that is a way to get a collaborator or to hook a collaborator in, and you could say, well, let's write this grant together. I have some preliminary work, but I need your expertise in this. And even if you don't get the funding, you now have the idea and you can kind of shop it around someplace else. Or maybe if you happen to have, department funds, you can do some of the work and start publishing and getting a publication record together, because that's hard, right? To get funds if you haven't published with the individual before. And then the last thing is to consider funding opportunities out in different programs within whatever your agency is. So like in NSF, I would normally fit into the operations engineering one. But now, like my last grant was not from operations engineering, it was from a different directorate, and luckily the program director was kind enough to point me to the right direction. But you can maybe start exploring different things, and you wouldn't think about it because everyone else is getting funded in this program or by this director at your funding agency. So think broader, or even ask if the program officer says is not a fit. You might say, well, is there another program or another directorate where you think this might be a fit? And they might say yes, but then you also are going to need to have a social science expert attached to it or something like that. But the opportunities are out there. Getting the funding is a lot harder.
I had a comment on that. Another thing about NSF, talking to the program managers is very important, because even if your area is slightly outside of what the program's describing, having that conversation makes them aware of who you are and what your science is all about. And I've also, over the years, gone to multiple agencies like USDA and NSF and got the agency leads to talk to each other, because sometimes they don't realize there's an opportunity for some collision science to happen unless the scientists make them aware of it, because sometimes the folks in the agencies just have their silos just like we do in academia at times. And so I encourage you, that's a very important thing to do too. If you have a great idea that could be a convergent science area, and it might be over food, and it might be fit with agricultural science and NSF's areas. And they have a new program that's infused intersection of food, energy, and water that NSF's funded grants on. I've been on a few of their panels over the last few years. And that's engineers, it's water science, it's agriculture, it's really kind of many different disciplines. And serving on those grant panels is really an important contribution, and you can learn where the science is heading and also contribute your ideas as well.
So once you get the money, how do you get the credit? That's always the bottom line, right? If there are 5 people on the grant, there's 1 PI and there's 4 co-Is, and one of the co-Is is doing really a lot of the work, maybe most of the work. I mean, how do people get credit? So I'm just going to pick up on Catherine's theme, is like you have to be your own best advocate for this to make sure that your contributions are known, are well known, and are understood by the audience. But that is a question that people have. Should I dive into this and put all this work into it, and I'm not the PI? So I think that's a hard question to answer, but it's really part of the whole interdisciplinary question.
And if I could make an appeal to the men in the room, because there's definitely different gendered response when a woman touts her great grant when comparison to when a man touts his great grant, because I have experienced that firsthand. And I'm beginning to think of interdisciplinary work as a kind of intersectional, if anybody's hanging out in social science and thinking about intersectional identities. Okay, so you know the joke is that a woman has to be twice as good as a man to get the same kinds of it's not actually a joke, it's science. I think it was in Scandinavia. It was some kind of award, and they showed that a woman indeed had to have twice as good a record as a man in order to receive this kind of nationally prestigious award. And so if you're working in an interdisciplinary, you're at risk of being feminized in some ways. You're also kind of at risk of being marginalized in other ways. And when people get marginalized, it's only natural that they want to kind of then stick themselves out there, right? And then if your department doesn't have that kind of culture of valuing when people stick themselves out there, and this might also be a generational thing, because I actually had a senior colleague say to me, he said in one of our evaluation meetings, in my day, you didn't toot your own horn when you published a book. You expected senior faculty members to do that for you. And so he was kind of offended by junior faculty members who were out there like doing podcasts and doing this and doing that. So it was kind of a stunning generational divide. So generational divide, gender divides, if disciplinary divides, if the terrain isn't there for people to be recognized, just notice that they're going to put themselves out there. And if you're feeling uncomfortable because somebody is putting themselves out there, one question to ask might be, does this person have the appropriate terrain already? Are they having troubles with recognition that I'm not aware of, and that's why they feel like they have to keep putting themselves out there?
Yeah, so I had another couple thoughts here to this question also. One thing is something that matters but probably shouldn't, which is I've noticed in at least a couple departments, it seems to carry more weight if you are the local PI as a subcontract of a grant than the equivalent work would be if you were, basically doing the same work where the PI was on campus. In other words, being able to call yourself local PI, it has a certain cachet associated with it, I guess, because you were considered good enough for someone at another institution to contract you to do the work. But it does seem to carry more weight, at least in some departments. And not that I'm trying to suggest that junior people game any kind of system, but it is something I've observed. Another thought is that the National Institutes of Health, for those of you who go for NIH awards, does have the formal MPI mechanism. And even if you are not the contact PI, you are an equal PI if you are one of the MPI investigators. And I'm on a new grant in which I'm one of 4. So they can be spread thinly and it can actually work. Yes, David.
I have a couple questions that set up perfectly, and it's the in-between what Jean was saying. I think it's the in-between what Jean was saying and what Chris and Nora were saying. That decision of what do you take, what's a good collaboration look like, and what's the right amount of effort and amount of time. So I'll use myself as an example, but lots of junior friends and colleagues have fallen into this trap of, oh, well, I should do this because this is a great project to be involved with, and I'll just do it for free because maybe I'll get a paper out of it, maybe it'll turn into something in the future, or I'll agree to this, and yeah, 5% of my time, sure, I'll agree to that, and then you realize that's 2 days a month, and there's 2 weeks of work a month that needs to get done, and you have a collaborator who maybe is a senior person who needs that done. So I could say this is just a problem, that's happened once or twice, but it seems pervasive among all my friends and colleagues who are in collaborative science. How do we get mentorship on that, or how do we, who flags that as, wow, bad deal from up front, and make sure that we can make healthy collaborations, I guess, or doable collaborations?
I think that the most important thing for everyone to have is a great mentor. Somebody who's a senior person, if it's not your department head, if it's somebody that you need, if you're in a large department that's very broad in its coverage of subjects, then you really should have a mentor that really understands your kind of research, NIH or whatever, and can help you make those decisions. Sit down with you, look at everything that you're doing and what this project will entail. A mentorship on this campus is very sporadically good, and I think that's my best advice for everyone, junior or middle faculty, and even some senior faculty. I still have my mentors, people that I go to when I need help. So I think you should always be reaching out to somebody who you think really can give you good advice and has your interests at heart.
You know, once upon a time, the Chronicle of Higher Ed ran a column called Ms. Mentor. I think she's retired now. It was hilarious. Yeah, you all remember her? She was funny. Her advice for junior faculty was not that hopeful. Basically, it was do what you can, get tenure, and then do what you want.
So as a senior person who has benefited from David's expertise, I'm a little bit conflicted by the question. But the advice I give generically is to be assertive, even to me, and also to look for the piece of data or projects that you can take as your own, because you know, I happen to know in your case you collaborate with many people who, some of them who are senior and have lots of data laying around that probably will never get published because there's more data than there are people who are willing to frame a question around it. And so, you know, in situations where it's relevant to give this advice, I would say just seize on that and basically say, I'd like to run with this. And there are many, many senior, you know, mentors, lab, you know, people who run large labs who would be thrilled to do that and who wouldn't necessarily insist on senior authorship because they know that this wouldn't be published anyway. And if your ideas are good and you can get your own graduate students involved, then, you know, someone's first, you're last, the person to provide the data is somewhere in the middle. I mean, that kind of opportunity, I think, you know, is something I'd look for.
We also have programs here at NC State, and also I want to introduce, there's a student in the back from Duke who's involved with the Preparing Future Faculty, and she's shadowing me for this semester, and she's a graduate student, Hannah McMillan. And that's a very good opportunity to learn when you shadow somebody and learn what they're doing in their day-to-day life and in different things, lab meetings or the department faculty. And so those kinds of programs are really good. NC State has one as well for preparing future professoriate, so you can be aware of the landmines ahead of time. And when I was going up for tenure and even after, I had 3 mentors. I had like my discipline mentor, the science mentor. I had the gender mentor, the woman senior faculty that I went to talk gender issues, because there were many of them. And then the political mentor. There was a faculty member, he knew all the insides on the politics, who was a good collaborator, who wasn't, who was going to use the junior faculty, who was, you know, there's always that kind of person in the department that knows the insides of a department or a team. So I've sought out different types of mentors, and it just, I didn't do it deliberately, but it sort of happened that way over time, and now when I look back, it was really valuable to have each of these 3 faculty. In our department, we require the non-tenured faculty, as they're going up for tenure, to have a mentorship committee, and I think that's really important, so they learn the rules and enjoy doing what they're doing with their science or social science.
Catherine, has something?
You know, I listened to your question, and part of me just kind of cringed because I remember the times that happened to me. I think it's happened to most of us, and if you will forgive me for being, yet again, a psychologist up here, what I'll say is, and this is, I think this plays off something that Nora has said, ultimately, you know, when you're doing a lot of interdisciplinary science, or even if you're doing a lot of discipline-based science, there's a whole lot of human relationship stuff that is in the mix. And, you know, most of us in this room have that one bad relationship we really wish had never happened to us. Some of you are going, oh God, don't remind me, right? And the same is true of some of our professional relationships, right? Many of us have that one professional relationship that, quite frankly, was just really not healthy and was not appropriate. And, you know, that happens to many of us. And so while I will say that one of the things that you do need to do, as Fred has said, is be very assertive and find the extra thing you can do, and then go, you know, to the PI and negotiate some, you know, think about, you know, let's rethink the FTE and I'll be able to bring this to it. But think carefully about what you say, what else you say you're going to bring versus the FTE you think you're going to put out there as what you need, right? But I think it is a fair and assertive thing to bring those conversations to your senior colleagues, to your PIs. But I also think it's a fair and appropriate thing to decide that some relationships, you know, when they come to a natural conclusion, you need to move on and find collaborators that are just gonna. I don't like to work very long with people who don't do what they say they're going to do. I try really hard to follow through on what I say I'm going to do, and it's very frustrating to me as a scientist when people keep promising me the thing but never deliver the thing. And so I think it is also fair to decide when those relationships aren't paying off. And that's a very tough thing to do when you are in a junior position, and you have to do it with tact and you have to do it with grace. And you need some other alternatives so that you can continue being productive. And I don't think any of those things are easy. But I do think that's part of what you have to kind of play out and talk out. And I think it speaks to this idea of having a team of mentors, some of whom may be very good at the science side of it, and some of whom may be very good at the interpersonal side of it, about how do you have those hard conversations with people. Because there are many hard conversations that most of us will have had to have to get to a senior place in their profession.
So we're getting near the end of time, and I wonder if our discussion has been so focused on junior researchers that we've neglected people who might be mid-career or senior researchers who want to do more interdisciplinary work. I wonder if the panel has any thoughts that occur to them. I mean, there are a lot of resources on campus, and so, for example, I highly encourage more senior faculty or working with me or connected to me to look for large grant proposal opportunities, center grant funding, that sort of thing. We have the proposal development unit represented here, which is an excellent group to help you with all the kind of needs there. And I think a lot of the advice that we have been giving here also apply to more senior people looking to cross-train and to stretch a little bit.
Yeah. So something that might be wonderful to have, since we have administrators here who sometimes have budgetary consideration, is little pots of money to help retrain a little bit. So there's a really nice, I think it's the Mellon Foundation has a grant, but it is for junior faculty to take a whole year. So say a friend of mine who's a cultural anthropologist went and learned toxicology for a year. And so just getting that time to kind of, you know, take the genetics class in my case, yeah.
Yeah, it's terrific. All right. I think given the time, we probably should go through and see if there are any closing thoughts that people had, that things that got, you know, they were inspired to think about. I was impressed by the breadth of the questions that were given. I think we covered many of them, but of course not all of them. And I think that, you know, it's a lot of food for thought today. One thing I wanted to emphasize when we're discussing the Chancellor's Faculty Excellence Program is to emphasize the positive, that this actually, I think, is widely seen as a pretty successful program, you know, nationwide. And of course, there's always room for improvement in various ways, but I've been very impressed by the faculty who've been hired and how just having the CFEP program has also, you know, fostered an appreciation of interdisciplinary work. So, any other thoughts, panel?
I would say there's just one question. We we were shared that I think we didn't answer, which was how do you develop visibility in multiple disciplines? And my thoughts were basically to get active in the associations, very strategically think about an association, but become actually active in it. And it might take a few years. And I have a trick for walking into a new discipline, which is that every discipline has its default small talk. In anthropology, it's field work. So I can meet any anthropologist in the world and we can start talking field work. With sociologists, it's what's your class background? They all get together and that's their default. So figure out what their default small talk is. And I'm not particularly comfortable talking about my class background, but I can ask someone else lots of questions about it. So.
All right then. Oh, I'm sorry.
Back to your question, I think one thing I was thinking about was that you may end up, as an interdisciplinary research, you may end up being the first at lots of things in your department. And just because it hadn't been done before, doesn't mean that they dislike it. It just maybe was not something that they had thought about. Like, why isn't there any math faculty on this committee? Oh, yeah, no problem. You can have a math faculty on the committee. You know, so it's just that you hadn't seen that, so people don't model it. People just kind of model the behavior that they've seen. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Hopefully you have someone or a department head or someone that you maybe can run your question by first if it seems too out there. But you know, why can't we go after NIH funding? No reason. You can go after NIH funding. So you may be the first, and so kind of. I guess you mentioned earlier that we think outside of the box anyway, and if you do that, don't be afraid to follow through with it.
I just want to make a closing comment too. There's a Life is Good t-shirt, do what you like what you do. I remember wearing that t-shirt when I was on a 3-week trek through New Zealand after a congress with a colleague of mine, and a guy in a shop we went in said, well, do you? And I said, yes, I do. And that, I think, is important when you're choosing interdisciplinary research. Think what your interests are and what are your close aligning fields. And, you know, on my side, you know, I'm a plant scientist, I'm an agricultural researcher, I work on a plant pathogen, but I really love history. I love digging into archival documents. I've enjoyed doing public communication of science. So I've sort of found and I like ecology, I'm concerned about the planet, so I go to ESA meetings, not regularly, but I do go. I'll go to the AAAS meetings because I can collide with people that are outside my discipline. And, you know, I try and do things that I really enjoy that align with my personal interests in the science that I do. And that's a really great way to enjoy what you're doing in your work at any stage in your career.
Terrific. So I think we're at time. Thanks very much to the panel, and I really appreciate it. I think this was illuminating, and I wanted to put in a last plug for this University Research Symposium. You have the information, I think, on the tables there. It's March 21st, 1 to 5 p.m. at Hunt Library. Thank you.